In today's video, we're taking a look at all the latest NHL trade and free agent rumors as we wait for additional signings and trades to take place here in this very busy NHL news cycle. Today, we're looking at teams like the Vegas Golden Knights. Were they actually going after Lightning captain Steven Stamkos? We're also looking at the Canucks, the Habs, the Jets, the Hurricanes, and a whole lot more. We'll jump into all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, a fair bit of today's information comes from the latest Elliot Friedman 31 Thoughts article that he put out today. Actually, it was an expanded article where he actually called it 34 Thoughts, gave some bonus ideas. Today was actually going to be Friedman's last 31 Thoughts blog for a little while until we get closer to NHL training camps opening up. He may do the odd one depending on the news cycle for the NHL, but he will be taking a break from doing them every single week. So obviously he had a lot jam-packed into this article. So let's dive in and get started with the Vancouver Canucks. Now, he mentions on Vancouver a couple of quick notes. He does not expect Jake Virtanen to make it to salary arbitration. That was filed. It could happen. But he does expect, based on what he's heard about negotiations between the Canucks and Virtanen's side, that they should have something hammered out and signed before it reaches that point. And the other part of Vancouver that he goes on to talk about as well is forward Josh Leivo, who he does say has a pretty decent chance of returning to the Canucks, but there are some other interested teams out there that are talking to the unrestricted free agent. Of course, Leivo had missed a lot of time last year due to injury. There is a connection that he mentions, which of course has certainly proven to be something to be mindful of lately. The other potential landing spot that he mentions for Leivo very well could be the Ottawa Senators due to his previous connection to head coach DJ Smith. We've seen other players connected to Smith lately be linked to the Senators as well. Seems like he has a bit of influence with Pierre Dorion and some of the player moves that we've seen here. So it very well could be one of those two Canadian cities once it's all said and done. Now, in the 31 Thoughts blog, he does offer a little bit of additional context on some of the other moves we saw the Canucks make in free agency, especially regarding the players that they lost in free agency, like Troy Stecher, Chris Tanev. For example, it looks as though they kept asking those players to kind of hang on and wait while they explored other options. Like they were in on the Oliver Ekman-Larsson trade. They were trying to sign Tyson Barrie. Tyson Barrie was offered more money in Vancouver than he was to sign with the Edmonton Oilers, but Barrie saw the Edmonton opportunity to be a better fit. Obviously, with Quinn Hughes being such a solid young defender and getting a lot of the power play quarterback time, he probably didn't feel he was going to be on power play one a whole lot, which is going to diminish his point totals, diminish his value there, and might not be as likely for him to kind of bounce back and put up the point totals that he can, so that he can show he's capable of doing what he used to do in Colorado. So obviously that signing with Edmonton was more about fit, but while they were focusing on making a splash in free agency and trade with some of these other big time players, they were asking these other guys to hang on, and at the end of the day, they really just couldn't wait too long to make sure they got their contract and got the opportunity. So there's certainly contracts that the Vancouver Canucks should have been able to do, especially in the case of Stecher. Not so much Tanev. I think that Tanev was able to get more money in turn from Calgary than Vancouver was going to offer, and it likely would have ended up happening anyway. But in the case of Toffoli, for example, I think they could have retained him as well if they could have, maybe given a little bit more attention to that contract without exploring those other big names. Obviously, at this point, it's too late. Those players are gone, but it's interesting to find out what was going on here behind the scenes. Now, he also mentions a pretty interesting tidbit here in this article, and he mentions it in his recent podcast as well, that the Vegas Golden Knights obviously are well aware here that they have their own cap problems, but they're also well aware of the Tampa Bay Lightning and their severe cap issues. Apparently, they were checking in on Steven Stamkos. Friedman does believe that the Lightning had approached Steven Stamkos, who, by the way, is recovering from surgery that he had after the season was finished, to about waiving his no-trade clause to see if there was any interest. Obviously, we talked about before, the Lightning have proved that they're such a strong team they can win without their captain. He's still a great, really solid hockey player who can be very productive, but he's certainly had more than his fair share of health and injury issues. And I am not surprised in the least that they would very well explore the possibility at least of moving on from him. Really go a long way to helping solve their salary cap issues. But at the same time, he, like many of the other players there, have full control because they've given out way too many no-move clauses. That's been well documented before. Now, of course, at the time when this was going on, they were also in on Alex Pietrangelo, who they've ultimately signed for a big-time contract, $8.8 million. They're already having their issues there, so I don't know what kind of return package the Lightning would have been getting, but given the Lightning's cap issues, I would think that there wouldn't have been too much going back. There might have been maybe one smaller contract, but nothing too significant. I don't know. I mean, we've heard so many names from Vegas's standpoint that's been in the rumor mill, like Max Pacioretty and Riley Smith, Jonathan Marchessault, Alec Martinez, Marc-Andre Fleury. I don't know what direction they were kind of gearing towards here for what the return would have been, but it's certainly interesting to see that at least that the Tampa Bay Lightning have at least explored the possibility of getting Stamkos to waive to trade him, and that Vegas, again, trying to be that big-time player to make the acquisition. As we've heard GM Kelly McCrimmon say recently in an interview, that a lot of these players are elite talents that rarely come available. So when they do become available and you have an opportunity, you want to be able to strike on that, which he kind of linked that back to what he did with the Mark Stone trade with the Ottawa Senators. Like, these players just don't often hit the market. So when they do, you want to be aggressive to get your team that kind of elite player to have, as best chance you can have to be a stronger team and possibly win a Stanley Cup. So obviously, as we know, Vegas has been extremely aggressive from the get-go. Their owner, Bill Foley, has deep pockets and is trying to take advantage of other owners who may have been experiencing harder economical times and are obviously wanting to cut back salary. So they're trying to take advantage of that in their favor, which only makes sense from a business perspective. But given the fact on how tight they made their cap situation now by bringing in the former St. Louis Blues captain, I can imagine how much tighter and what kind of crazy scenario would have had to unfold to be cap compliant by bringing in the former Tampa Bay Lightning captain Steven Stamkos. Can you imagine? But I must say this, if you look at the Vegas lineup, in my opinion, the one thing they are missing is that true top number one center, and Steven Stamkos could be that guy for them. I don't think they have enough depth at center for that top-end, high-end elite talent like a lot of the other teams have, which is really the main area that Vegas is not as strong as some of the other top teams around the NHL. There's still an awesome hockey team who likely will win a Stanley Cup sometime soon, I would think. They've come really close a number of times now, but getting a player like Stamkos would be absolutely huge. It's just crazy to think about what they'd have to give up through trades to make their cap situation work. They might be too depleted that really you have to question if it even would make a lot of sense. Now, when it comes to the Montreal Canadiens, apparently things have been extremely quiet as well, with Habs center iceman Phil Deneau. Apparently there's been no contract talks on an extension here so far. So with all the UFAs the Montreal Canadiens now have for next season, you have Deneau, you have Tatar, and there's several others, including some RFAs in there. They're going to need new deals. Bergevin's already made it known, which is really obvious by looking at it anyway, that he's not going to be able to keep everybody. So with the fact that Deneau has been, upset with his role at the end of the season, there's no contract extension talks going on so far. Now, I know there's time, but it's just certainly something people are monitoring. Other teams are looking at them saying, okay, well, if there's no talks on extensions going on, they have 1 year left, they very well could be potential trade bait. I know from the standpoint of a Montreal Canadiens fan, and Habs fans probably would love to see Deneau locked up. I know they're very popular players, and that very well could still happen, but you just have to understand that with contract talks being a main source that other teams kind of keep your eye on to determine players' availability, that if things are quiet and it's not looking like they're going to get extended, that certainly becomes more likely that they would be moved. So we'll see what happens. I don't think it's anything really Habs fans need to stress about right now, but it's certainly something that we need to monitor because we could see Marc Bergevin possibly pull off another trade or somebody else who's down to their final year of their deal. Because they are going to be tight in their cap situation heading into the next 2 years with all the additions they've made, and it's certainly questionable who they can bring back after signing that, especially that Josh Anderson deal. He did note, Elliot Friedman, in the 31 Thoughts column, that Anderson basically told the same thing to Columbus before the trade. I either want a 1 year deal or I want the max deal. So 8 years in Columbus's case, 7 in Montreal. He didn't want anything in between, one or the other. Now, a 1 year deal and would have walked him directly to being a UFA next year, which neither team wanted that to be the case because they would have been extreme likelihood of losing him for nothing. So obviously Montreal's not going to give up Max Domi to bring him in and give him a 1 year deal and then be at risk of losing. That wouldn't have made sense. So if that's all he was going to agree to, which I would imagine Bergevin likely would have been made aware of ahead of time, given the fact that both players have the same agent as well. So I would think that he probably knew that going in, but It ended up being a big-time payday for Josh Anderson, and as much as he's going to be a good player, you throw that in with the other signings. They extend Jake Allen today on a 2-year deal, and it just makes things really tight. So there will be cap casualties of Montreal sometime next year, and you're going to have to look to, obviously, the UFAs that are coming up here. It makes sense that they could either walk during free agency or be traded ahead of time before they lose them for nothing. And it's also been reported in Friedman's 31 Thoughts blog that the Winnipeg Jets are actively shopping Jack Roslovic to get him a fresh start. They had hopes that he would become the number 2 center, but he's yet to really grab that spot. After bringing back Paul Stastny via trade here with the Vegas Golden Knights, clearly he'll play lower in the lineup, and it just doesn't make sense here for that to take place. They still need help on the blue line. Apparently there were talks that they had with the Florida Panthers, as did other teams, about the availability of Mackenzie Weegar. The Panthers were interested in Roslovic, but it seems like the Jets were somewhat reluctant to pull the trigger on that deal. So not to say that they couldn't possibly revisit that, but we could see Roslovic traded out of Winnipeg for additional help on the blue line, because they certainly have a ways to go to replenish what they lost last year. They're still not obviously back to the point where they have as much depth as they really need to be, a serious contender in the Western Conference. And speaking of blue liners that are available, I'm not sure be of interest to Winnipeg because it's a different kind of defenseman, but the Carolina Hurricanes apparently are trying to trade Jake Gardiner. As we saw last year, that Gardiner contract is not terrible, but he didn't really work out all that great with the Carolina Hurricanes. He had a bit of a down season. Certainly did not put up the numbers like he was used to doing in Toronto. I know there was a lot of concerns when he signed that Carolina contract last year. As a free agent, it took him a while to get that contract. The market wasn't quite there for Gardner that I think many people thought would after, like I said, having some pretty good offensive seasons in Toronto. I mean, I know a lot of people gave Gardner a lot of grief for his defensive blunders, which is certainly, fair to an extent, but obviously, the offensive numbers just weren't there because of the blue line depth of the Hurricanes. He's not getting the opportunities to play so high in the lineup and get all that power play time when you have other guys ahead of him, especially Dougie Hamilton, who eats up a lot of those minutes. So it makes sense that they would try to maybe move on from Gardner, bring in a different kind of player, probably somebody within the forward group. The Carolina Hurricanes are still considering adding another forward, somebody who can ideally be like a scoring type winger. They are linked as well to being interested in UFA Mike Hoffman, who's one of the teams interested there. You can also throw Columbus and Boston in the mix, and the Nashville Predators as well when it comes to Mike Hoffman. I'm not sure when we're going to see a signing, but apparently those are the teams kind of kicking tires, talking contract. He could circle back to the Panthers, but some believe if the Panthers are going to re-sign either he or Dadonov, that Dadonov might be the more likely player to make his way back to the Panthers organization. But sticking with Columbus here for a moment, you have to wonder what they might be having up their sleeve for the next move, whether it be signing Mike Hoffman or something otherwise, because they've made a lot of moves, clearing some cap space heading into free agency, and it looks as though they were trying to be a big player with some of the big names, whether it be Taylor Hall or Alex Pietrangelo. It is believed that they did try to have negotiations. I'm not sure how far things got with the Blue Jackets, but that they were somewhat involved, or at least reaching out to those players. There are connections between some of the Blue Jackets management teams to Pietrangelo from their time that they used to work in St. Louis, so there are a lot of familiarities there. So I'm sure there were conversations, and some believe that the Jackets might have been the second or third preferred destination after Vegas once he kind of realized the fact that he wasn't going back to St. Louis. And I think at this point it's fair to say that Pietrangelo was wanting to try to make it work in St. Louis, but once they signed Torrey Krug, it was 100% given at that point that it wasn't going to happen, and he really turned his focus on mostly going to make it work with the Golden Knights. But obviously the Jackets didn't really make any big acquisitions. They signed Max Domi after trading for him with Josh Anderson deal that we talked about, but otherwise they didn't get Pietrangelo, they didn't get Taylor Hall, so they do have room to make a move. Like I said, whether it's going after Mike Hoffman or maybe could we see an offer sheet? I mean, there are teams like the Islanders and the Lightning that are in really tough. You got guys like Matthew Barzal and Anthony Cirelli, Mikhail Sergachev that are certainly high risk for an offer sheet, and there's not a lot of teams who can do it because there's a lot of cap space that's been eaten up, and you have to wonder if Columbus would be one of those teams that would consider it. I know they talked about doing that for Mitch Marner last year before he signed his contract, and Marner wouldn't sign an offer sheet, so it never reached that point, but there certainly was a lot of interest on Columbus's part on trying to get him to sign one. So we'll see what the Jackets do. I fully expect them to be somewhat busy here sometime soon to try to shake things up and add some more scoring. They are also shopping their goaltenders, trying to maybe use one of them as trade bait to bring in a potential player as well, depending on what moves they need to make. But it wouldn't be completely crazy to think they come back with Korpisalo and Merzlikins, because the goaltender market has certainly kind of calmed down here a bit after many free agent signings. So let me know your thoughts on everything discussed here today down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.